How much is that?
And we're live here on the Podcast Editor Mastermind Show. Thank you all for joining us, those of you who are watching the live stream and those of you who are tuning in to the podcast. I'm Jennifer Longworth of Bourbon Barrel Podcasting, and below me is
Brian Ensminger of Top Tier Audio, and beside me is
Daniel Abendroth of Roth Media.
And above Daniel is our special guest for today, Lauren Wrighton. She's a podcast strategist and producer who helps female business coaches launch and grow a podcast that make an impact on their audience and businesses. She also uses her expertise in podcast production to teach freelancers how to become podcast managers and develop their own clientele. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
So you're a podcast manager. In your own words, what does that mean?
Yes, great question. That's the $1 billion question of this live and of this podcast episode. So I'm a podcast manager, and that means that I help people manage their podcasts. And to dive more into it, it means I will edit, upload, schedule, write the show description, write show notes, help them with their promotion on social media, help them land guests. So really manage all the tasks that we all know a podcast takes to get it out the door each week. That's what a podcast manager does.
So you do all of that. Do you manage other people or do you do it all yourself?
Do I have anyone on my team? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
So I have people on my team through my course, but as far as me managing my clients, I do all of it.
How long have you been doing that?
So I've been doing this since 2018. Started editing podcasts in 2017, but started being a podcast manager and really started my business fully in 2018.
Perfect. About how many clients are you serving right now?
So right now I have 2 clients, which is an amazing low number for me, but it's really because I'm focusing more on my course now. But I've had maybe 20 clients in the course of my career doing this. At the most, I work part-time, by the way. So at the most I had like 7 clients, which was a lot because it was like 21 hours packed of work. So 7 is my all-time high at one time, and 2 is just so sweet.
So I'm kind of in awe right now because I knew when you talked about what you did, because I took the course, right? And I didn't realize you were literally doing all of the things. And when I think about the prospect of taking the client load that I have and saying, okay, now I'm not just going to edit. I'm also going to help you book guests, and I'm assuming there's some content strategy going on with that as well. And then you've got all that stuff. Like, how in the world do you even think about getting all that done without losing your mind?
Well,
good question.
Yeah, great question. And I think we have to remember, like we were talking about before we went live about how I'm scared for my kids to turn into teenagers. And it's the same type of thing that like, you don't start with everything. You don't start starting from the top of managing guests and doing all of it. So when I first started, I was just editing, and then I was uploading and scheduling and writing descriptions, and then I was writing show notes. And the guest management piece, which you really are involved in the person's business at that point, that came last in my kind of development. So yeah, I guess that's the way is how do I keep it all together? It's like I find it to be easier to do all of those things once I'm inside of someone's business and someone's podcast. It makes sense. I know them so well. So yeah, and also I only work on one client at a time. So I'm not managing everyone at, all over the place. It's really focused work.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping right into the weeds, but the first question that pops into my head is, okay, you manage them one at a time. How do you do that? Is like a time block or one-on-one? Like, I can't even wrap my head around it.
Well, yeah. So my desired work hours, I work part-time, as I said, and I started working only from 7 p to 10 p because I was also wanting to be a stay-at-home mom. I was kind of doing both at the same time. So I would literally just do one client at a time. And that's why I could only do 7, is because I only had 7 days in a week. I would get 99% of that done in the 3 hours. I knew how long stuff would take me. So yeah, I would focus on one client a night. And so I was somewhat communicating with people during the day, but as we know, a podcast is such a machine that once you get it up and running, you need to make tweaks. But I wanted to make it as smooth on on my clients as well. So we just really tried to focus on streamlining so that we didn't have a lot of like back and forth. And it was like, okay, it's Tuesday night. I'm going to do Brian's episode now. And everything was there. And if it wasn't, somebody was going to be paying for it.
So how did this come about? So you kind of talked about your progression from editing to now I'm doing this. Was that something that you're conscious about from the beginning or something you grew into? Or was it kind of more based on like what your clients were looking for?
Yeah, it was definitely conscious because what happened was back in 2016, my friend and I started a podcast. So I guess I technically started editing in 2016. We just, we were the DIYers, hobby podcaster, just like, how do we make this happen? I don't honestly know how I made it. I don't like I launched it. I don't remember any of that stuff, but I was doing that. I was editing our show, and I was also became a mom that same year. And so I was like, how can I take this and make it into a part-time job? I knew I loved podcasting. I wanted to make it happen. So I got on Upwork and landed a client after so much effort. I don't know if you guys, if any of you have been on Upwork, but it's a job board for anyone that's listening that isn't familiar.
I got started on Fiverr.
Did you? Okay, so similar.
Yeah.
I think it was actually Elance back then, if we can take it back a couple years. So I started on Upwork, landed a client, was just doing editing, $30 an episode, painful. Mind you, I didn't know what I was doing. I have no background in this at all. I actually went to school for neurobiology and then got a full-time job in fitness. So audio production, no, not so much. So anyway, I that's how I got started. I was editing for this woman, doing a good job, but definitely taking forever. It was just taking me so long, and all of her episodes were different, and there was no end in sight. So I actually quit. I realized like this is just not worth it. And I can't figure this out. And like, I'm going to have to figure out something else. I had no community. Like I didn't know. I don't know if like who was doing this. And I know there was podcast editors, but I wasn't in community with anyone. So it was really difficult. But then I ended up meeting a virtual assistant coach a couple months like after I quit. I quit on this one client I had, and I found someone who was a virtual assistant coach, and she was like, "Oh, there's this whole virtual assistant world." So I did that, and then kind of brought together my podcast editing skills with my virtual assistant mindset, and that's when I was like, "Oh, I can make something happen with podcast management," and kind of took on that term as a podcast editor meets a VA.
Okay.
I'm actually a little bit interested in that epiphany that you had, where you said, okay, a VA world, podcast editor, kind of bringing those together. What did that epiphany look like? Like, how did you come across that idea and then go, okay, this is actually what I'm going to do? Like, how did you walk through that process?
Yeah, so it was in February of 2018, I started as a virtual assistant, and I still had the podcast with my friend this whole time, podcast about fitness. And this virtual assistant coach that I met, I took her course to become a virtual assistant, and she was wanting to start a podcast. And so I was a virtual assistant, and she's like, "Don't you have a podcast, right? Like, don't you edit?" And I was like, "Yeah, but like I've tried it, and I just it wasn't." It wasn't working for me. And so I was really resistant to going back to podcast editing as a service. And she said, "Well, I want to start a podcast." And it was a couple months later after I'd met her. And she's like, "You're the person I know. Would you do this for me?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, like I love this. I just didn't think anyone would pay me for it." That was my mindset block around it. And so I launched her podcast. I launched hers, and I didn't know if I could niche down and only be a podcast manager. But she told me to go for it, and it was pretty much an experiment. But I landed 6 other clients within like 3 months of that time. I was like, okay, yeah, this is a thing. There's an opportunity here.
So when did you start calling yourself a podcast manager? And like, what was that shift?
Really from the start of deciding that I was going to go from virtual assistant to podcast manager, I decided I was going to use this term podcast manager. And the reason was because the people that I was surrounded by, they were social media managers and Pinterest managers. And so it was like, I wanted to be very clear as to who I what service I was providing. And I was providing the same type of thing a social media manager was providing, but for a podcast. So I was very intentional about using that term. Although, of course, a lot of people were like, what is that? And I'm like, oh, I will tell you. And I'm still getting that question today. And it's a well, I don't want to say I made it up because I'm sure I didn't. But people were like, wait, what does that really mean? It's kind of intuitive, but it's still, begs a lot of questions.
Yeah, because I struggled with like what to call myself because like I've always called myself an editor, but like I've been offering like uploading and scheduling and kind of the management aspect. I don't do I outsource show notes, so I do offer it to my clients, but I don't do it myself. So I've been doing this for years now, but I've never figured out like what to call myself. But like podcast manager is just so like on the nose, like the perfect term.
Right. Yeah, it's broad enough too that like when I listed the services earlier, not every podcast manager offers all of those. And not every podcast manager, like you said, they'll offer it, but they outsource it because we all have our strengths. And one thing people ask me a lot is like, well, how can you be good at all of those things? I'm like, well, most people aren't great at all of them. I'm not going to lie. We're not all good at graphic design and writing and editing and all of this. But you can get started as a podcast manager by doing a lot of them and then find your way like, oh, I really love the editing. I really love the writing. I really love the whatever it is. And then outsource or just focus on what you love.
And you do guest booking as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I see that question come up in podcast forums on Facebook a lot about who books guests, how do you book guests? So do you have any, like, I don't know, tricks about booking guests?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it sounds more intimidating than it needs to be. I think that's one of people's holdups is that they think like, oh, then I'm going to be responsible for like, what if I can't land anyone or what if I like those kind of things pop up. I think it's really an organic service add-on when you have been working with someone and you know their audience really well and you have a really good feel for their show. Like, oh, they should have this person on. And also, if you're working with the same type of people, like you're working with authors or you're working with parenting coaches or something, then you yourself are in that space and you know the players, like who's coming out with a book and like you already have your thumb on who could be a great guest. So that's why I find it to be pretty organic as an add-on. But as far as like tips on, your question was basically like tips on actually landing client or landing guests. Is that what you asked?
Well, what I'm hearing is that it's relationship based. And if you have the strong relationship with your client, you're going to naturally discover guests for them in the relationship. But that's kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, for sure.
So what type of skills does it take to be a podcast manager?
Yeah. So really, it's best if you have like the project manager personality. So you like to manage things. There is some babysitting your client involved, which as editors, you're already doing that. So there's ultimately, I think one of the great things that a podcast manager brings to the table is that they're the person that makes sure everything is ready. So your client is no longer the person that says, is everything ready for the podcast that's going live tomorrow or whatever that is. You become that person. And that's one of the huge value pieces that you bring to the table. But that also means that you have to be the type of person that can manage the details. So there's some definitely detail oriented, but also some top level thinking that has to be involved. And I find, someone that takes initiative thrives in this position because they can expand their role with a client just because they're one to take initiative, like with the guests. They bring their clients guests, even though they're not contracted to do so. And then the client's like, oh, well, shoot, this is amazing. I would love for you to do this for me, on a more consistent basis. So initiative, majority of the time a podcast manager will edit. So editing skills are key. Sometimes like people in my course, some of them do not edit and they really want to be that project manager. And so they outsource the editing to an editor. So I would say the management personality is most key for most of the managers that I know.
So I'd like to kind of key off of that, right? Because I would assume that there are some people listening right now that are going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there we've talked about some of the personality traits, but Are there things that they can look at in their work history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show? Because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control or, some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you. Because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at if you were going, okay, this person might have what it takes or might not?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, I guess, a desire to be more involved. Like some of the editors that I've spoken with, they love the fact that they get to work. You probably will work on more shows as an editor than you would as a podcast manager because the role is bigger. So if you love working with 10 plus whatever clients and you like just kind of like the one and done type of relationship, then you might be best as an editor. If you want to get in and help the person grow, if you're kind of want to kind of invest in people a little bit deeper, then that would be a good sign that podcast management might be a better fit. Something that you said though, I'm spacing it now. I don't know.
I was probably spacing it when I said it. So
yeah, I know it'll probably come back. But yeah, so I would say, and writing. People don't realize that like podcast management has a lot of writing involved and you can outsource it, but it's more difficult to outsource in my opinion. So you don't have to be great at like graphics. People can help you with graphics, but writing, if you enjoy writing show descriptions, if you enjoy like pulling out stuff that's from the episode for show notes and stuff, then I think that could also be a key that, hey, this is something people are really looking for. So if you enjoy doing it, then podcast management might be the place for you as well.
If I can then just kind of take that one further. So let's say, for example, that I have a show that I currently edit and the host doesn't really like writing the title and the description. And I think about approaching that as an add-on. How would I think about pricing that in relationship to the work that I'm already doing? Because you could make the case that it shouldn't be a 1-for-1. If it takes me 2 hours to edit an episode, it shouldn't also take 2 hours to write the episode notes, but it's also not like 10 minutes and done, right? There's a lot of focus that goes into that. How would you recommend somebody approach pricing that as an add-on?
Yeah. And you reminded me of my question of going from being in this editor relationship with someone to then being in a like a podcast management relationship. It is different. So I can go in, I can answer that at the end of this, but if you thought in your head, like, okay, I want to add on like one service, or I want to try out writing these descriptions for this client, what I would do personally is I would say, hey, I'm now offering these additional services, whatever it is that you potentially wanted to do. But I would try to do more than one. And you could say, are you interested in adding on these services? And if they say, hey, yeah, let's do show description and uploading, that's something, everyone wants to get off their plate, then I would say you would want to completely change the way that you're presenting your pricing to them. So if you have like, a per episode editing, or I'm not sure if you want to let me know how you do it, but I would then put it into a package and say, like, this is your podcast management package now. Because then they're not seeing like, oh, well, he's charging me $50 to write a description. That's not really worth it. They're not seeing that kind of exchange. Instead, they're seeing he's doing all of these things for this price, and that's worth it. There's a mentality switch that happens. I would say like, oh, I wouldn't say it's going to be $50 extra for me to write the description. They'll probably be like, meh. That's okay. If you say, okay, hey, this is what it would look like for me to do all of these things, then it's presented differently.
Sure. I guess I was thinking like internally, how do I think about pricing it? I would definitely approach it as a package, right? And go,
Gotcha.
Okay, if this is what you want, this will be the new price. That totally makes sense. You remembered something, so I want to make sure I leave space for you to.
Yes, I was going to say, if you're in the position where you're thinking, okay, I am an editor, and how do I pivot into a podcast manager with clients? I think that can be tough, to be honest. I think sometimes you have to leave behind some clients that know you for that one thing in order to kind of go into something else. So you were saying like, you're just in this very comfortable spot with them. You're their editor. I've tried to pivot into like one of my first clients. I have like 4 first clients in my head. So excuse me, I say first client and it's like 5 different people. But yeah, one of my first clients I just edited for, and it was at a low rate. And I tried to move into podcast management and she didn't see my value. And I was like, well, how do you, it's tough to like take someone from, $30 an episode to 100. They're like, wait, what? When did this girl learn anything or whatever? So I think sometimes it can be tough. You have to kind of more utilize what you've learned and the testimonials you've gotten from those editing clients, and instead kind of get into new clients as a podcast manager.
I like that. And I am being a little bit selfish in asking this because I do have a client that's already asked me about this kind of thing. So I know that there's an interest. I just don't know how to approach the pricing. And frankly, as a person who works full time and also edits, it's a little bit challenging to go, okay, what is this time worth to me that I think that they would be willing to pay? Because, to write the episode notes and the description, that could be another hour for every episode.
Right.
Theoretically, right? I don't know.
Yeah, when you say episode notes, do you mean like a short description or do you mean show
like
notes?
a blog,
Right.
like the blog post that would go with it? So probably something less than 1,000 words, but more than 300.
Yeah, and that does usually take me like an hour. When I think of editing, I usually like budget an hour-ish to do like writing the episode description and show notes and uploading on all of that. So yeah, you're right. And you've gotten a system together because you've been editing for a while. And so what's that time to you? And maybe you put out the number that feels right to you. And if they say no, you're like, okay, that's what would feel best for me right now. But I think too, if you're giving someone a price for like just like a show description and uploading, that's more of like a convenience to them. The price isn't like that high because it's not that much. If you're doing show notes and like social media graphics, then it's a bigger package. But if you're just adding on something small, it's more of like you're testing to see if you want to go further with this client. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Well, one of our questions had been if you're a podcast editor, what's the next logical step towards becoming a podcast manager? And I've heard you say many times it's show descriptions and uploading. That just keeps coming back around to what you're saying. Would that be your next logical service to provide?
Yeah. I would say that. And if you really just want to take like a half step, I would say description and uploading. But then I would say if you want to take a full step, it would be show notes with those two, and then possibly like social media graphics, because the way I see social media graphics is like updating social media graphics and like pulling clips so that you're creating audiograms. You're likely not creating brand new graphics. So you don't need to have a ton of like additional experience creating graphics. You can just edit their graphics that they already have, and you're already editing, so you're already in the audio, so you pull clips. It's convenient, very convenient for them, because if they are doing audiograms, that means they're paying someone to listen to the show and pull out clips to create audiograms. And so when you say, oh, actually, I can do all of that, number one, in their mind, it's so much cleaner. They're willing to pay for that, but it's also can be kind of a smooth system for you as well.
Are there things that you've ever considered offering to your clients that have turned out to be non-value added in terms of like they're like, yeah, it sounds great, but no.
Yes.
No, don't care.
Yes, I do have something. So I was trying to really raise my prices at one point. I was like, I grew my business, and then I was like, okay, I need to raise my prices. And I was kind of going into the second phase of my business. This was maybe back in 2019. And so I decided that I was going to start offering strategy, like podcast strategy. That's a thing. And so I started on like discovery calls. I was chatting with potential clients, and I would tell them like, oh, well, I am very strategic in everything I do. And I just was like strategy. And I remember one really blunt, people were saying no, by the way. And one really blunt person I talked to, appreciate this woman very much because it was a huge light bulb moment for me. She was like, I'm a 7-figure business owner or whatever, fill in the blank. And I have a business coach. Why would I hire you for strategy? And I was like, oh, okay, good point. And so what I realized was I just needed to raise my prices. I didn't need to have a new term, or I didn't need to over-explain what I was doing. I didn't need to add fancy words. I just needed to raise my prices. And I actually went to a conference and heard something, and it all clicked together. And so I just raised my prices, and I don't overkill on the strategy anymore.
That's huge. I remember we were talking to Brittany Felix, and that was kind of like her thing. It's like, you don't need to justify that your rates are going up. They're just going up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the thing is, the longer we work with clients, the more experience we have. We know it works. And so it's just experience. if you have to have a reason, it's experience.
Yeah. So what are some pitfalls into, as far as like podcast management? Because you're taking on a lot more responsibility, taking on more on your plate. So what are some like pitfalls to kind of that you've run into and like that we should look out for those that are looking to get into this?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I would say
What are your nightmare stories?
yeah, I would say client boundaries, because you're opening the door for you to take on all of these like small minor perhaps things that they want, but then it's like if they ask you, oh hey, can you start thinking of a Facebook Live topic for me based on my podcast episode? You're like, oh sure, and so you just add that on, and then it's like 5-10 more things that they've added. You have to be so clear on when they've crossed the line, when you need to raise the price. And so I love like when people give me words to use for my clients, like tell me what to say. I need to know what to say. So what I tell people is like when you can add some stuff on, because if your rate is high enough, you're like, yeah, I can do that. That sounds great. That's very organic for me to do. But if once it's like, no, I need to raise the price, you can say like, oh, I'd be happy to do that. I will send you an updated invoice, or I'll send you an updated proposal. And then if that looks good, then I'll send you like a new invoicing contract. Because then it signals to them like, okay, this is a different price. This is a different package. Some clients, they don't realize that like, oh, is this included? Is it not? That's not really their responsibility to like keep track of like everything that you're doing for them necessarily. So you need to remind them, hey, this is the boundary. And we probably could talk about client boundaries this entire time, but this is the boundary and I'm happy to do this, and it's going to be a different price, and I'll let you know what that is in your email.
I'm taking notes because that Facebook Live topic sounds like a great possibility to add, to go, okay, when I listen to your episode, I'm already pulling a clip. I'll also send you 1 or 2 topics that you could talk about, and that then becomes part of the package that actually you're not really delivering, right? Because they still have to deliver the live. But
yeah.
You're providing them the idea. That's
yeah. Or here's even a newer one that I'm testing out for my show is I'm having my podcast manager think of or just pull out like a tip or two from the show. And it might not be a tip always. Like if it's a guest interview, it just might be like a golden nugget from every show. And I'm going to try to create a reel from them for Instagram. So I'm not sure exactly how it's going to go because I'm not 100% great at reels, but that's my new thing that I'm testing.
Very cool.
Okay, let me write that down real quick.
Yep, totally stealing your ideas right now.
Go for it.
Thanks for coming on.
But I think what this highlights is, so like whenever I started adding on services for my clients, the strategy behind that is that I want to be indisposable. Like I want to be so valued to the process that the idea of like them finding someone cheaper or like moving on from me is so uncomfortable because like I'm so ingrained and so they see the value of what I bring. And just like all these little things are just like great ways to take more off their plate so that they can focus on whatever they're doing, their business or whatever. And it just makes you invaluable to what they're doing.
Yeah. Definitely.
It's like the opposite of T-Mobile, where you're waiting for the contract to run out so you can switch companies. Like, you actually want to stay with Daniel. I like that.
Yeah, because, I mean, I hate to say this, but you can find cheap editors. Like, if you're just editing, like, there's plenty of people. And as, like, our industry grows more and more, you're going to find a lot. It's going to be pretty saturated. But if you can build that relationship and then just, like, ingrain yourself into, again, every little bit of the podcast, then it'd be really hard to find somebody to replicate that.
Yeah. And I would say one way that, you have to think of creative ways to bring value to their show and to their business. And one key thing I think is being a true listener of their show. Like if you're going to actually listen to their show, even if you don't work with them, then that means that you are like I said earlier, you're following the other people that are in their industry. You're reading the books, maybe you're just in it. And so you can give them some great ideas just because it's like, oh, I know this space. When you don't know this space, it's a lot more work because you're not just doing it in your spare time. You're not like scrolling through Instagram, basically working for them because you're following all the people that they follow and things like that.
So let's say I'm an editor and I am an editor, but I want to start adding these services, but I don't know how to do any of these things. So where can people go to up-level their skills? for this?
Well, I have a course. Do you want to hear about that, or do you want to hear about other ways? Okay. I'm like, this seems like too easy of a question. So yeah, I have a program where I teach that. So there's one way, a very easy way that you can do that. I would say if that's not your answer, then finding people, being in community with people that are doing this, and well, I guess two things. Ask people, hey, how are you doing this? How are you promoting your shows? How are you, doing this and that? But then also, you can just see what's working in the podcasting industry. Like if you want to just add on episode descriptions, then look at how people are writing their descriptions. What's the most common practices? Do you think that's working? So just doing some education by researching podcasts, I think you can learn a ton from just doing that.
So where do we find this community you keep talking about?
Well, I mean, there's your guys' podcast editor community. I have a free Facebook group called the Podcast Manager Mastermind. And then, there's other places on Facebook that I feel like these communities have just exploded over the last couple of years. I think there's a lot of great conversations happening in those Facebook groups, and people are just really willing to share what's working. I think there's some tech talk where people try to outdo each other. If you can get past that, then you can learn a lot.
Are you talking about me again?
I'm not calling anyone out on here, but that's my pet peeve is I always think about the person that's just brand new and they're like, RX8, I can't do this. They're like, so I'm just like, hey, it's fine. You can do it. Stick around.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked a little bit about education. One of the things I'm wondering is, what do you wish that you would have known before you got started?
That's a great question. Gosh. Well, part of me wishes I would not have started on Upwork. I wish I would have found clients through Facebook and things like that. But whatever. Our experiences are experiences. I think I probably would have raised my prices sooner so that I could have kind of gone deeper with people and felt a little bit more ease. But but because of that, I've worked on a lot of different kinds of shows. So I would probably say the pricing piece. I definitely, had my prices low for too long. So probably that.
I think a lot of
us,
a lot of people in our industry are guilty of that.
Yes.
Maybe, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So let's talk about how you find clients. It's a frequently asked question.
Good one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for our listeners and in Facebook groups, oh, I need clients. How do I find them? So how do you find clients?
Yes, I love this question. Well, I would first say, who do you want to work with? And if your answer is anyone that will pay me, then I would say, let's think a little harder. Let's take it back a step. Let's think about somebody that you really want to work with, because the easy answer is Facebook groups. That's the first place that people find clients, right? But maybe not. Or maybe you're like, I hate Facebook. I don't want to be on Facebook. There's other options. So if you're thinking about who you really would love to work with, where are they at? If they're an author, if they're maybe more of a CEO type, then maybe LinkedIn. Some of my students only focus on LinkedIn networking, and it's so much less saturated than Facebook. So it has that going for itself. There's less people less potential clients. But if they're if they want to work with someone who's a little bit more corporate, or a lot of authors are on there, then that's a great option. Facebook groups, especially if you're going for coaches, parenting coaches, business coaches, those type of people are definitely on Facebook. Instagram has been up on the uprise. And then the biggest one that's being talked about in my community is Clubhouse. So I think just because of the fact that you're actually hearing someone talk live, that relationship is built quicker. And so that's why it's been effective for people. But Clubhouse, and then also cold pitching. I just actually talked to someone today about how she cold pitched. So she sent a cold email to an organization that she's really passionate about, and they don't have a podcast. She pitched them a podcast, and they said yes. And I'm like, I love when that,
wow,
that's
nice.
That's impressive, right? Just cold pitching to a podcaster is one thing. Cold pitching to just, whatever. Now, this is a very niched topic. It was a Native American type of business. And so it's like, she's Native American. So it was like just a match made in heaven. But still, I was just like, gosh, I love this. So cold pitching people, podcasters doing it well. We could talk about mistakes there, but that's really effective too.
Well, let's talk about those mistakes.
Yeah, well, I wanted to follow up on the LinkedIn thing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure.
LinkedIn, because I have podcast in my description or whatever, I get spammed by podcast promoters a lot. And how do you differentiate yourself from that pack?
Yeah, that's a good question. Specifically on LinkedIn?
Yeah, specifically, LinkedIn is where I get the most of that, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would probably say like leading with value instead of just trying to like, hey, I love your podcast. Do you have a podcast manager? Instead of just like kind of just trying to like ring them in with that hook, I would say probably just leading with more value. I did a podcast episode with a LinkedIn. I don't know if she'd consider herself a LinkedIn expert, but a LinkedIn person. And guru. And she was talking about how she recommends people to use like an opt-in or a freemium PDF style thing on LinkedIn. So like you make a connection with someone, you chat for a couple minutes, and then you give them a freebie, not to capture their email, but just a freebie. And she said that works really well on LinkedIn. People are really looking for value. And so then at the end of the PDF or whatever, it has your contact information. But that's what I've heard works well on LinkedIn. Yeah. So I feel like the way you talk would also just differentiate yourself from all of the other spammer types.
Yeah. Daniel,
you had a question.
Oh yeah, let's talk about the mistakes that you mentioned.
Yes. Okay. Let me just think of the mistakes. I actually, I told you guys that I started a podcast with a friend. She's still doing it just by herself. And she'll tell me when people will reach out to her and say like, hey, do you have a podcast manager? We'll just ask her. And she's like, please, I hope they are not in Lauren's group because this is bad. It's just a small circle. So I would say just like saying like, hey, oh, Daniel, I love your Instagram I love your Instagram profile. I love what you post. Do you have a podcast manager? It's like, you're just waiting for it. You're just waiting for them to pitch you. So that I would avoid. I like to be really formal about cold pitching. Like I like to send an email and follow up. And so I know like people definitely cold pitch over DMs, but it just can be slimy. It's like you just have to do it. You have to be genuine. Actually, my daughters listen to a podcast called Kid Short Stories. I'm like their number one fan. And so I'll post about it on Instagram because it's like the cutest thing ever that my kids will sit for like 40 minutes and listen to this podcast. And so I was like unintentionally growing a relationship with this host. And he actually reached out to me recently and said, hey, I would love to get on a call with you to see if you would manage my show. And I don't take on clients anymore. So I referred him to someone else. But I was like, this was like the most organic relationship building. And it took like 6 months, I guess. But I wasn't really doing it on purpose. But yeah, that was very genuine. And so if you're in it for the long haul, I would say like tagging your favorite podcasters in your Instagram stories and doing things like that really help promote them, then you can get on their radar. And then maybe sending a formal email. That's like my favorite approach.
So it's providing value and building relationships again.
Yeah. Yes. Always.
What a crazy idea.
Right. Not being spammy.
Don't be spammy.
Yes.
Who knew?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many DMs I have ignored over the years.
Yeah. Well, I can't explain how many people I get that are like, hey, if you ever need help on your show, I'm a new podcast editor. And I'm like, do you know what I do? Because that doesn't sound like it. I know a lot of podcast editors. I don't need any more.
Yeah, like, and if you're like just like the bare minimum amount of research, like I get emails just saying like, hey, I love your Instagram post. It's like, I haven't posted on Instagram in like a year and a half now. Like, what are you talking about?
Which one from 2019 are you referring to?
The one of my cat or the one of my look? Yeah, it's like, what are you talking about?
Yes.
You mentioned the thing about people reaching out to you that are editors. One of the challenges that I've had in working with other editors, trying to bring some other editors like as subcontractors, is effectively pre-screening in a way that doesn't waste their time and waste mine. Do you have any tips on how you've helped people pre-screen so that they know that the person that they're talking to is at least really close to being qualified before they ask them to invest some time in like a sample edit or something?
Yeah. I would probably start out assuming that they have some sort of experience, which I'm sure that they would. You're not going to be training them, right? On editing.
Not.
Yeah. You're like, please no.
I don't have that kind of time.
Right.
I'm trying to get back time.
Right. So I would say just, having them send you an edit that they've already done. And I only need like 2 minutes. If I listen to a 2-minute clip, I can tell. I can tell what the positives and the negatives are. So I don't think that piece of it, listening, would be that time consuming. Maybe you do 5 minutes, but having them just submit from the get-go, I don't really care about what someone's experience is, like how many people they've worked with, or that number doesn't really matter. But what does it sound? What does their audio sound like? If you're hiring them as a subcontractor editor, you need to know that it sounds good. So give me maybe a before and after, so I can see the difference. But 2 minutes, and I think you're like, okay, this is a yes or a no. And then from there, if you weed down, how many people that you have, then you could have maybe a 15-minute conversation, and then you can feel out their personality and things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's in the course?
Yeah. So it is 3 phases. The first phase is learning the skills. So the skills being editing, uploading, scheduling, show notes, social media graphics, guest management, and launching, how to launch a show with a client. So those are the skills. And then, like pulling stats. I always forget about that one. Delivering stats to clients. So those are the skills that I cover. And then the second phase is getting experience, getting testimonials, getting your confidence up, because Lord knows we all need a little bit of confidence boost. You're like, okay, I'm ready to do this.
I feel attacked.
I know you so well. Third is actually launching your business. So how to structure your packages as a podcast manager, how to display your prices and your how to design your proposals, after you get on a call, the process of landing a client, like all of that stuff, onboarding, and then client boundaries. As I said earlier, I love client boundaries. And so that's part of that whole launching and growing your business.
And I should probably mention that so that just everybody is aware, I did buy Lauren's course, and that's how I connected with her.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit there, and I can say I'm probably only halfway through it because I have a tendency of taking multiple courses at the same time, which slows me down, and is exactly what you shouldn't do. But I found it to be very helpful for the portion that I've made it through so far.
That's great. That's great.
I thought it was very good.
Thank you so much.
The stat aspect intrigues me because, like, I get on quarterly calls with my clients, and we look at the stats. Whenever I first got started out, I always wondered, like, how can I present the stats, like give them like a report or something so they can see like how their stats are going, and then never really kind of materialize something. So that's aspect that kind of fascinates me, how you do that.
Yeah. So I find that it really depends on the client. It's like people really love to like have a really smooth system, and I love systems. I love streamlining, but every client is different. And when it comes to stats, every client is different. Some clients want every number, or they already have a metric metric dashboard that they want you to plug information into, and they love stats. Then that person is going to want a lot, and they're probably already going to have a system. There's other people that, like, I have a client and she's like, just Slack me like something you found interesting. So that's what we do. She's like, everything is just kind of blends together. So I'll make sure that for her, so I'll make sure she knows when we're going to hit like milestones, and when she has like like when she's on the charts or something significant. And then also for her, because she's just kind of interested in the highlights, I'll also let her know, if she gets like a really great review or like a really unique review or something. So I'll tie reviews into that, and just kind of, I feel like it's like an adrenaline shot. It's like, hey, by the way, the podcast is doing great. So I try to send her something minimally monthly for that person. So I really just try to see what they want. I have a system of like what I will send everyone and what I recommend. But then as you see what the client actually cares about, then you kind of trim away or expand based on what they care about the most.
And how often are you looking at their stats?
I would say weekly, just because I'm scheduling for them. So like whenever I schedule, I'll just look and see, where we're at, and I'll do some math on, what things have looked like. And I don't know if you guys are Libsyn users, but now that Libsyn is updating, their stats are going to be like at the top, and they're going to show like 90-day downloads and just some numbers that are actually really great to see.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, winning well for this. I'm kind of excited about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if people are interested in this course and learning all about what you offer, how can they find it?
Yes. So I have a masterclass where I go into how to become a podcast manager, even if you don't take my course. But I also talk about the course at the end. And so you get to hear about all of the phases that I spoke about earlier, but also the bonuses and kind of how the whole program works together. So I would say first for them to go watch my masterclass, because then they can get a really deep dive into what this is all about.
Is that on your website?
It's on my website, yes. But they can also get a seat at laurenwrighton.com/masterclass.
Very good.
Yeah.
And of course, we'll put all the links to everything in the show notes, which you can find at podcasteditorsmastermind.com. And then also we had a comment so if you're listening to the audio playback, we had a comment from Elizabeth who said that I'm in the course and highly recommend it. So far in this one episode, you got 2 recommendations, one from Melissa and one from Brian. So
yeah, this is great.
Two isn't bad, right?
Yeah, not so bad at all.
So what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this time with you?
Yes.
If you had to pick one thing.
I would say, considering that I'm assuming everyone that's listening is an editor. So with that in mind, I would say, if you're thinking about this, know that you can definitely do it. I think we kind of identify ourselves as one thing. And so can we be a podcast manager, or are we just an editor? And there's a little bit of like value, like, am I worth that? Can I do this? Are my skills good enough? And so I would just say, I would just want to give some encouragement that if you're interested in this, I think you should look into it. Take a step at a time, and just know that, hey, you can look into it, see if it's a good fit for you. If it's not, then no big deal. But I would just say encouragement is what I would want to give across the sound waves.
So are we ready for the Poddex question of the day?
I think we are.
I don't know if we'll ever be ready, but
So for those watching or those listening, we do have a pod deck. They do not sponsor the show. Please don't tell them we do this because they may make us stop. But today's Poddex question of the day has been slightly modified, and I just pulled it a minute ago, so I haven't had much time to think about it either. It is, what's the funniest name you can think of for a pets podcast?
What?
And the funniest name that you can think of for a pets podcast. And I'll go first. Mine is going to be Escaping the Hamster Wheel. Tales from the Cage.
That is too good. I am not ready for this.
Well, should we do Daniel next?
Yes.
Throw you under the bus.
So mine is going to be a life coaching podcast for dog called Positive Outlook.
Oh, that's terrible.
Oh my gosh. I'm the worst namer of podcasts, and not to mention pet podcasts.
Okay, here's mine. Yeah. Cats and Rats, Life at My House.
Okay, gosh. I need to think of a dog one. I don't even know. You guys are too good. You guys have had some practice that I'm just not. I think,
A couple episodes ago, we did an improv class. So
Yeah.
there you
I
go.
sucked at that episode.
Episode
but,
24, I think. Yeah.
Gosh, I literally have nothing. I'm sorry.
Should we let her off
Okay,
the
what's
hook?
the most boring idea of a pet podcast you could come up with?
Probably like my show, which is just like so like straight to the point. It'd be like the Pets Show.
The pet.
There you go. That's
Okay.
the most boring one.
whenever you said like you were blinking, I thought that was a perfect podcast for a goldfish.
I love it. So should we tell people if they want to be on the show and have to endure this kind of stuff with us, how they can do that? Should I do that?
Daniel. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
It's because Daniel's been doing all the work tonight. So if you're listening or watching and you think to yourself, man, I would love to impart some of my wisdom to these people. We would love to have you on the show, whether you've got a question that you want to have us maybe help you think through, or you're an expert and you want to offer something like Lauren did about how other editors can up their game. podcasteditorsmastermind.com/be a guest. That's all one word, be a guest. That's where you can find that information. We'll just ask for your contact info. If you have some topics that you're interested in, really easy questions, we'd love to get the opportunity to feature you on the show. podcasteditorsmastermind.com/be a guest.
And if you are looking for the opportunity to build your portfolio and would like to edit a sample episode, we would gladly welcome you to do that. We have a sample that we send out to people who just want some practice. So if you go to podcasteditormastermind.com, we can help you out with that too. Just reach out to us and let us know, hey, I want to edit a sample of your show, and we'll get you hooked up.
We've done that for a few people. That's been really helpful, and I'm glad that the rest of us were able to provide enough information and enough stuff for somebody to have to edit that they could come out of that going, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, if you can edit this show, then you're well on your way.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Missing today was Carrie Caulfield Eric of YaYaPodcasting.com. I'm Jennifer Longworth, bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com, or at KY Podcasting on social media.
I'm Brian Ensminger. You can find me at toptieraudio.com. That's where it links to all of my social profiles, which interestingly are all at Top Tier Audio because I can remember that. And next to me is...
I'm Daniel Abendroth, and you connect with me and find everything at rothmedia.audio.
And I'm Lauren. Thank you so much for having me on the show. You can find me at laurenwrighton.com or on Instagram at instagram.com/Lauren Wrighton.
I forgot to mention that Lauren also has a podcast. If you are interested in getting into podcast management, her podcast would be a great way to start, and you can find that on her website at laurenwrighton.com.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. And again, podcasteditormastermind.com for past episodes. Like, subscribe, and leave us a review because it really helps with our downloads.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
So how much is that?
Yeah.